before we go any farther, I just wanted to begin by doing a land acknowledgement. We begin all our meetings this way because it grounds us in the historical context of the work that we're doing. And I'd just like to begin by recognizing that we are doing this work in the climate justice movement here locally in so-called Seattle, Washington, which is the traditional territory of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people. And there's a very direct way that we can support the Duwamish people as we occupy their land, and that is through a program called Real Rent Duwamish. If you're not familiar with it, I recommend going to realrentduwamish.org, and you can support the Duwamish tribe directly by giving a monthly donation to them. They're not federally recognized. And so our support as people, as settlers who are occupying their traditional territories is significant since they don't receive any support from the federal government. And it's one small act that we can take to put our words into practice and support the Duwamish tribe directly. Now, as I said, this training is being recorded because hopefully the media team will continue to grow in the future. But for now, what we're going to do is, this is an introduction to Adobe Premiere. We're going to cover editing a really simple project that's been really common during the pandemic, which is getting our Zoom webinars onto YouTube. It is a super, super simple, straightforward project that will let you dig into some of the tools and the workflow that you're going to be using in Adobe Premiere. So I figured it was a good introductory thing. And then if we have time at the end, I'll show you what one of the more detailed projects will look like. There's a series of how-to videos that we're doing with the Artful Activism team. And hopefully we'll have time to take a look at one of those so I can show you what a more complex project will look like. But for now, let me pull over my notes. My notes are on this other monitor. So if I'm looking away, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's because I'm just making sure we're on track to cover everything we need. So yeah, we're going to go over intro to Adobe Premiere, overview of some of the workspace and tools, how to access 350 Seattle's Adobe account. So all of you as volunteers for 350 Seattle will have access to Adobe Premiere. And so we have one account and you can't have multiple people using the account at the same time. So what I'm gonna have to do before I can really get y'all rolling on this is set up a timesheet. So when you plan on using the 350 Seattle account, you'll write your name in so that people know who's using the account and how long you plan to be using it for, just in case there's any overlap with folks wanting to use it. This small of a group, I don't expect there to be a lot of overlap, but as we grow, it'll be important to use that timesheet to make sure that folks aren't like having trouble accessing the account or don't know who's using it when they need to access it. I'll be sending all of this info in a follow-up email, probably on Monday, because I'm going to be out of town this weekend, and it'll contain the information for, the login password and stuff like that for the account, as well as step-by-step instructions for how to edit this first project. But for now, we're going to get into some of the details of Adobe Premiere, and we'll double back to accessing that cloud account later. So what I want to do first, I'm going to do a screen share here. I also do this work in these kind of trainings for Sunrise Movement. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Sunrise Movement, youth-led climate justice organization, really leading the push for a Green New Deal on a federal level and local levels as well. And I just put together a guide with an intro to Adobe Premiere for them. So instead of creating a separate one for 350 Seattle, I'm going to give you guys access to this guide, and it'll give you a lot of the information you need to get started with Adobe Premiere. So let's get started. The screen share. Go over here, share that. And let me know, can y'all see that workspace layout? Yep, sweet. So this guide was actually designed to be a captioning guide for the volunteers with Sunrise, but it also goes into an overview of Adobe Premiere. So we're going to get started. Let's see, right here. So when you open Adobe Premiere, this is what it's going to look like. This is an overview of the workspace. You'll have 4 different main panels that you can access, and this is the default layout. This is what it'll look like when you open it. In the upper left corner is your source monitor. This is where you can play back the footage that you've imported to your project and make selections on what parts of those clips you want to use in your timeline. And then you can drag them from the source monitor to the timeline. And I'll show you how to do that when we get into Premiere. But next is on the upper right-hand side, number 2, that's your program monitor. So this is the live playback of the footage that's on the timeline. And as you probably already see, the timeline is directly below that. That's number 4. That's where you'll be doing all of your editing, is in that timeline where you'll be making all the changes. And number 3, the project panel. This is where you import all of your assets. So you import your footage, your logos, your music, any sort of graphics you might be using. You use the project panel to import all of those and organize them. And organization goes a long way. I'm sure you've all learned that working on different artistic projects, but it pays to be organized. And let's see, so a little more detail about all these. The project panel, this is just a closer look at it. So you'll be able to see the names of the clips, or you can look at them as thumbnails. I'll show you how to change that. You'll be able to create bins within the project panel, which I'll show you how to do later as well. But these bins, you can see the titles here: sequences, news clips, motion graphics. Those bins are really important for keeping your footage organized when you're working on longer projects. The timeline, fairly self-explanatory. I'll get into this in more detail as well when I actually open Premiere and walk through the steps, but the top half of the timeline is your video layers. You can have as many layers of video as you need. And then the bottom half is your audio layers. And I'll show you how to import and move things around in the timeline once we open up Premiere and get into that. As I said before, you'll have access to this document, so you'll be able to refer back to this stuff later. The source panel, a little more info about the source panel. When you are in your project panel and you double click something in your project panel, it will appear in the source panel. And then you can use these controls down here to play back the footage and set your in and your out points. And the in and out points determine what part of the clip you'll be adding to your timeline. And this will all make more sense once I show you step by step how it all works. Now, last thing, I didn't mark it here. You can see before or in between your project panel and your timeline, there's this little bar right here with some tools. So these are the basic editing tools that you'll be using. Once again, this guide was created for Sunrise and was created specifically to teach them how to do captioning within Adobe Premiere. So there's some tools that we didn't go into detail in this guide. If you'd like, I can explain those more later. But for now, the most common one you're going to be using is the selection tool. The shortcut for this is just V on your keyboard. The selection tool, you're going to be using 95% of the time. That's how you drag your clips around, how you reposition things, how you add things to the timeline from the source panel. Track selection tool, you can use that to select a clip and all clips to the right or left of it. Then the next most common tool you're going to be using after the selection tool is the razor tool. This is the shortcut for this is C on your keyboard, and this allows you to just cut a clip wherever you click on the timeline. And I'll demonstrate that for you as well. And the type tool, which the shortcut for that is T, and that's what you'll use to create text in your video. There's a list of some of the other shortcuts here, but that needs to be expanded. So this will be filled out more by the next time you see it, hopefully. All right, and then the rest of this, I believe, gets into captions. So what we're going to stop doing here is stop that screen share temporarily. And I'm going to open Adobe Premiere. So we'll start sharing my other monitor. And at any point, y'all, since this is such a small group, feel free to interrupt me, cut me off, ask me questions if anything arises that you want to know more about. I'm kind of breezing through a lot of this, so if something didn't make sense, please let me know. All right, now I'm going to share this screen. Oh yeah, also promise you won't judge me. My desktop is super, super messy. So yeah, no judging. All right, so in order to open Adobe Premiere, I have it down here in my dock. So I click on these captions. All right, click on Adobe Premiere, open that up. You'll want to make sure you're using the most recent version. So when you download it for the first time, you'll have the most recent version, which should look like that. Then when it opens, you'll have the option to either open a project you've already created or create a new project. For the purposes of this training, we'll create a new project so I can show you what that looks like from start to finish. So we go new project. It's moving a little slow. There it is. It appeared on my other monitor. Here it is. So when you hit new project, this is what comes up. First thing you're going to do is name your project. So this will be Adobe Premiere Training. Today the 22nd. Let's go with that. 22nd, 2020. And then you want to choose where to save the project. So you're going to come here and hit browse. And I have an external hard drive connected that contains all the work that I do for 350 Seattle. So I'm going to choose that 350 Seattle folder on my external hard drive. If you don't have an external hard drive, don't worry, you can save it to your computer. But once you start working on bigger projects, we may need to get you access to an external hard drive to save the footage. So I'm going to choose that folder. And then don't worry about the rest of this stuff. After you've done that, you can just hit OK. All right, and it also opened there. So moving this into the correct space. All right, so as you can see, everything's blank. We haven't imported anything. This is what it'll look like. You've got your source panel here, program panel, your timeline, and your project panel. So what we're going to do right now first is import footage. Right here where it says import media to start in the project panel, you can either double click anywhere in here, or you can go to file, where is import? Import right here. Another shortcut is Command I, but what I like to do is just double click in this project panel and go back here. So we're in my 350 Seattle folder. What we're going to do right now is go to these Zoom meetings, which is the first project that y'all might help out with. So let's pick one. Let's go to the Maritime Solutions webinar. Did I already edit this one? All right, we'll just go with that. Cool. So you imported it. It appears in your project panel. And we're going to import just a few other things before we get started. So I'm going to double click again. It takes us back to the folder we were just in. And I need the logo. So I will also be giving you all access to a Google Drive that has some of these logos so that you can use them in your projects. So I'm just going to import that PNG as well, so we can add that logo to the beginning. All right, so the next step is to create your sequence. So your timeline here, you can see right next to timeline, it says no sequences. What a sequence is a, should have looked up the correct definition of this, but it's basically just where you will be doing all your editing. So it might make more sense if I show you. So if I go to new sequence, you can also hit Command N. You're gonna have all these options to create a sequence. And what you want to do is match your sequence settings to the settings you had for the video you're working on. So this isn't a training on like technical camera skills such as frame rates and resolutions and things like that. So if you're not familiar with that stuff, I apologize. But basically the two things you need to understand are frame rates and resolutions when setting your sequence. So most of your work is going to be done at a resolution of 1080, which is full HD, and a frame rate of 30 frames per second. And so I do that by going to this AVC HD folder, opening the one that says 1080p. P stands for progressive, which is the format in which most footage these days is shot in. So you want to choose the one that says 1080p, and then come down here to 1080p 30, and then you can name your sequence. And we're just going to name this test. All right. And then you can hit the OK button and it will create your sequence. And now hopefully this makes more sense what a sequence is. So this sequence is a separate timeline. So you can have as many sequences as you want. So maybe you're working on a longer documentary project and you need somewhere to organize your interviews. One thing I frequently do is make a sequence called interview or organization. And then, for example, if I was working on a long documentary, I would have all of my interviews in one sequence, and then I would have all of my B-roll footage in a different sequence and keep them organized in separate sequences. And then I would have a sequence for each of the drafts of the project. So I would have draft 1, a sequence for draft 2, a sequence for draft 3. And this is just an organizational tool that makes it so that your timelines can stay cleaner and it's easier to find what you need within each of those separate timelines. So for this project, we only need one sequence. And as I was saying, since I'm on the topic of organization, your project panel over here, in order to keep things organized in there, you want to be creating bins, which I mentioned earlier. In order to do that, down here, there's a folder icon. It says new bin. You can just hit that and it creates a bin. Also, good shortcut is Command Z. If you hit Command Z, that's undo, and then Shift Command Z is redo. Now I undid that just so I can show you a different way to create a bin. You can also right click and hit new bin. And I like to keep all of my sequences in one bin. So I'll create a bin for sequences. All right, and we will import that right there. All right, let me refer back to my notes. Let's see. All right. Cool. So now we're going to talk about adding footage to the timeline. Does anybody have questions so far? I know I might be going kind of fast, or maybe I'm going too slow. If all of this seems too basic, just let me know and we can move on to more advanced stuff. But cool. So the next thing we'll talk about is adding footage to the timeline. So as I mentioned earlier, also another thing that's useful to know is you can customize your workspace however you want. So you'll see each of the panels has a black line separating it from the next panel. And if you hover over that black line, as hopefully you can see I'm doing right now, you can control the size of the panels. So if you want to be able to view your program monitor and watch your footage, your timeline on a larger screen, you can adjust that. You can also expand your timeline so that you can see it in more detail. If you have a second monitor, you can actually move these and drag it to a different monitor if you want. So you can really customize the workspace for however works best for you, which is really nice. All right. And then if you customize the workspace a bunch and realize you don't like the way it works, just come up here to Window, Workspaces, and hit Reset to Saved Layout. And that just brings you back to the default layout. Now, we're going to talk about the source panel. So you can see right here, source, no clips. That's because I haven't selected anything yet from the project panel. So if I double click this webinar, Maritime Solutions, it appears in the source panel. Now, I'm going to change the playback resolution so that it runs a little smoother. And now you can see right here the length of your clip. This webinar was 1 hour and 13 minutes long, and we are not going to use that entire thing. So what I'm going to do before I drag it into the timeline, I'm going to set my in and out points. So it looks like the webinar starts right at the beginning. So I'm going to hit I on my keyboard, just the I button. It sets the end point. And then we're going to scrub through it until we find where the end of the webinar is. Normally, a lot of these webinars, they'll end at a certain time and then people will stay on later for like questions and answers, and we cut that part out. We don't worry about that part. So I'm going to find where the slides end. There we go. That looks like the end of the webinar. Call to action at the end. And so we'll go, and then, yeah, that looks like the end right there. You can also press space. The space bar on your keyboard is play. So if you want to watch it back, you can just hit that, or also use this key right here for start and pause. All right, now I found the end of the clip that I want. So I'm going to hit O to set the out point. Now it's 51 minutes, and I'm going to click and drag it into my timeline. Now, what happened here is Zoom, when they're recording these webinars, they record them at really weird frame rates and resolutions. So even though I picked the correct settings for my sequence, it says that the clip doesn't match the sequence settings. What we want to do here is always hit keep existing settings, and we will edit the clip to fit the sequence settings. So does anybody have any questions so far? I just want to pause periodically for questions. All right, we'll keep going forward. So what I'm going to do right now, you can see here, V1, V2, V3. These are all my video tracks, A1, A2, A3. Those are the audio tracks. I'm going to hover right here underneath my first audio track, click and drag down, and that expands the track so that I can see the audio waveform better. And that's really useful for these webinars, is because you'll notice there's a big gap in the audio waveform. That was when they did a breakout group, and we cut out those blank spaces. So that's the first step I like to take, is expand the waveform for the audio so that I get a visual note of what parts I need to cut out. Then what we're going to do here to match the settings of our video clip to the settings of the sequence is I'm going to double click it. So you'll know if you click it once, it highlights it. If you double click, it brings it back into your source panel. And this time, since you double clicked from the timeline, instead of double clicking from the project panel, you have the option to come in here to effect controls. And this is where you can control the scale, the size, and the position of the webinar. It looks like for this one that we don't actually need to resize it. This fits pretty well. You'll notice we have the entire PowerPoint here, as well as their little video clip in the upper right-hand corner. What I would like to do is just adjust this a tiny bit so that their video clip is a little bit bigger and it's a little bit easier to see. What I'm going to do that is making sure that our webinar is still selected. Come up here to the effect controls after you've double clicked the clip. Under motion, there's scale, and watch what happens when I drag this. So the scale is basically the size of the video in the timeline. Now, if you ever make some crazy adjustments, come in here, do all sorts of weird stuff, rotate it, you don't know what happened, there's these undo buttons right here. So at any point, you can just hit reset on these, and it'll take you back to the original settings. So all we're going to do for this one is make it a little bigger and then readjust its position so that it fits correctly within the frame. And what we're going to do for that just needs to be a little bigger. So I'm just going to type in 105, have it grow, have it scale up just a tiny bit, and then use this position. So 960 and 540, those numbers are determined by the resolution. So when you chose those sequence settings, we chose 1080p, which is 1080 pixels vertically, and then 1920 pixels horizontally. And so this is centered. 960 is halfway. It's the middle point of those 1920 horizontal pixels. 540 is the halfway point of those 1080 vertical pixels. So we're just going to move this a little bit to the right. Unfortunately, it doesn't fit perfectly, but you get the idea. You can, certain webinars, certain people's cameras will record differently. So you might have to do this for some, and you might not have to do it for others. Sometimes the settings are perfect. Sometimes they're a little wonky and you have to adjust them. So we got that resized. It might not be perfect, but it's good enough for this example. Now, what I'm going to do next is come down here to cut out this section for the breakout room. And what we're going to do here, one of the most common shortcuts you're going to use pretty much every single time you use Adobe Premiere is the plus and minus keys on your keyboard. So if you hit plus while you have the timeline selected, plus is zoom in and then minus is zoom out. So you're going to use this constantly. So what I like to do is zoom in, and then I switch tools. So right now I'm using the selection tool. I'm going to come down and use the razor tool, and I can switch to that just by hitting C on the keyboard and then clicking where I want a cut made. Going to zoom out again, click here, and the video, or you'll zoom wherever the playhead is. This blue line is the playhead. So I'm going to zoom there, hit cut. And now you have this separate clip right in the middle, and I am going to make sure that's selected, and I hit the delete button and it's gone. Now you should be using the selection tool again. You can either select it here or hit V on the keyboard and then drag this over to the clip to close that gap. Then as you can see, we no longer have that gap in the audio, and it just skips the breakout room and jumps right back into the presentation. Now, I need to be conscious of time here because I do have to wrap this up at 2 o'clock. So let me check my notes and make sure I'm covering the important stuff. Cool. Okay, we're doing great. Sweet. So the next thing that you have to do, this is pretty much the simplest edit. That's basically all the editing that you need to do for these webinars. It's really, really straightforward. One thing that I would recommend is just watching the last minute of the video, and that will allow you to double check that you did end it at the right time and that you didn't cut off anything important. Don't worry too much about that. It's actually better if you leave too much on there. And once I've uploaded it to YouTube, I can actually trim it later when it's on YouTube. But it is easier if we get it to the right length the first time. So what we do for the beginning of these is just some really, really simple titles. So what we're going to do here is bring in this 350 Seattle logo that we already imported. And this is where layers come in handy. So I like to have my video on one layer, then my titles and graphics on a different layer. Now, in addition to bringing that logo in, I'm going to hit T on the keyboard, which selects the type tool. And then in order to type, you come up here to the program panel and you just click anywhere, and then you can begin typing. And this was the Maritime Solutions webinar. And what we're gonna do, I don't like that font. I don't think it looks very good. So I triple click. If you click once, it controls where you'll be typing. Double click to select one word and triple click to select the whole thing. Now, making sure, so when I hit the type tool and started typing up here, it created this font layer right here in the timeline. Now I'm going to move that up to another layer and zoom in a little bit. There you can see it says Maritime Solutions Webinar. Double clicking that, I'm now going to come over to the effect control panel, and right here it says text. You can hit this arrow for a drop down menu, and this is where you control the all the details about the text. So you can control the font. I've been using this Montserrat font. At this point, I just got to let you all know I'm not a designer. I don't have the design aesthetic that some folks do. And I am welcome to feedback on what fonts y'all think look best. We haven't come to a decision about the best font to use for videos. So I'm totally open to feedback on thoughts on fonts that we can use so that we create a cohesive branding and image for the YouTube page. But at this point, this is what I've been using so far, and I think it works good enough for our intents and purposes for the time being. So once you've selected the font, uh, you'll also want to control the position. So I'm going to use this transform panel underneath the text drop-down menu. And by clicking and dragging, I can adjust the height of this text layer. Now that looks okay. And what I'm going to do here, this is where the layers come in handy. So I have this logo right here and the text layer. In the timeline, I want them to be on top of one another so that they line up. Clearly the logo is not in a good spot. So I'm going to double click the logo, come to the effects panel, use that position to move it up a little bit. And it's a little too small. So I'm going to hit 150, see if that looks a little bit, could be even bigger. Let's go to 175. That looks nice. And then I'm going to come back here in the timeline, select the text layer and adjust that one a little bit more too. Now, this is really basic stuff. The last thing that you might do for these titles is come back over here to your project panel. And within the project panel, there's all these other folders that you might use. The only ones you're really going to use for these projects are effects and your main project panel. So under the effects tab, if you wanted to do a simple crossfade, which is a transition you might use a lot, you'd go to video transitions, dissolve, and hit cross dissolve, and then drag that effect onto the beginning of your video. You can also do this for audio. So you go to audio transitions, and then choose a type of crossfade and drag it onto the audio right there. And then you can adjust the length of that crossfade on either the video or audio. For this though, I like to add just a very basic sort of animation to the logo. So what I do here, we have these presets, and I'll give you these presets in the Google Doc folder, and I will provide instructions on how to import the presets, but I don't think I have time to go over that at the moment. So I like this one, rotate in, super simple, about as basic as it could be. And you just take that preset from the effects bar and drag it onto the logo. And then you'll see up here in the effects controls panel, it added this effect, basic 3D rotate in. And this is actually a good tutorial on keyframes as well. You can see what keyframes are. So looking in this effect control panel, what it did was it added keyframes telling the animation what its position should be. And then it automatically interprets the difference between those positions so that it creates a smooth effect. I'm not sure if that made sense or not, but we can watch it and see what it looks like, and hopefully that makes more sense. So it just rotates in and then it rotates out. Really, really basic stuff, but it's just a little bit nicer than the logo just appearing out of nowhere. And for the intents and purposes of this training, all I'm going to do is add a cross dissolve to the text. So there, now we can watch it back. I think what I'm going to do is adjust this a little bit. This is where I start to get picky. And I just want things to flow a little smoother. So there, something like that. I know it's not fancy. I know it's not amazing or has a huge wow factor, but doing simple little animations like this will give you an introduction to how to use the effect controls panel, how to use presets and different effects from your project panel, and how to work with layers. So the last thing that I like to do, And once again, I'll be providing y'all with step-by-step instructions for this when I send the follow-up email on Monday. I like to go like this. So I like to select both of those. You can tell they're both selected because they're both highlighted in white. Right-click them and hit nest. And what this does is it creates a nested sequence. So everything that I've selected will now be in its own sequence, and you could name it. Let's name it Maritime Solutions Nested Sequence. I can spell, right? There we go. All right, see, and so now those two clips appear as one clip, and any effect that I apply will be applied to both of them. The reason I want to do that is, oh yeah, and if you needed to edit something within a nested sequence, you double click it and it opens a second sequence that has your original footage in it. So this is nice for larger projects, and it's nice when you need to apply one effect to multiple clips at the same time and have it affect them all in the same way. Now what we're going to do here, I'm going to use the crop tool. So if you're looking for a tool, you can just come in here and type in the tool you're looking for, and it'll appear. Then I drag that onto the nested sequence. And what we're going to do right here is add a little transition. So let's move this a little bit. Come in here, go like that. Boom. And so now the nested sequence, since I added that crop effect, we can add some keyframes. And what's going to happen is we are going to keyframe a transition into the webinar. So I'm going to hit this button right here. That'll create a keyframe. This is what a keyframe looks like. Then I'm going to move the cursor a little bit, and I'm going to hit this button, which is add or remove keyframe. Now, for this second keyframe, I want our nested sequence to disappear. Oh, you know what? I forgot to add something to this sequence. So we're going to come in here, add one simple important piece, which is a black color mat. Sorry, I'm doing this kind of quick in the interest of time. What that does is it's basically just a black layer underneath our text and graphic. And so what happens now when I go back to the keyframes, this second keyframe, I'm going to make this crop 100%. And then you'll see what happens. So the first keyframe, the crop is at 0%. The second one, it's at 100%. My apologies. And now we can just watch that and see what it looks like. So yeah, not the prettiest. That needed some fine tuning, but the idea is that I am adding a transition into the webinar so that it flows a little bit smoother. And what I'm going to do right now, just to show you what this looks like when I have more time, is actually open the project that I've done these past edits in. All right, so here is what they look like when they're more completed. So you can see I have all these different sequences. I have a sequence for the general meeting, a sequence for trainings we did this summer. Here's the Maritime Solutions one. Oh, actually, let's look at this sequence. Huh, that's funny. Okay, well, we'll just look at this one. So here's an example of what the titles for the intro might look like when you're completed. You've got more layers, nested sequences, some additional information, and a title. We're just going to play this through. That comes in. Information about the training comes in. Sorry, playback resolution is low. Then additional text, because we didn't record the beginning of it. Oh, that was because there were technical issues.
Part of what this training is hosted by 350 Seattle's Pledge of Resistance team. And 350 Seattle is a...
So that's an example of what those intro titles might look like. Now, I am supposed to be on my way to Bend, Oregon right now. So I'm going to pause here and we can just chat for a little bit. Do folks yeah, what questions do y'all have? I know that was a lot of information all at once, and anytime you're learning a new program like this, it's really overwhelming at first. So yeah, I just want to open it up for people's thoughts, what made sense, what didn't make sense. Anybody want to share anything?
I'm not sure if this is going to make sense, but under the effects controls for the video, like where it has the resizing and all that, I was wondering if there's sort of a style guide that 350 has for, standard sizing. It sounds like maybe it's, and then like, typefaces, it sounds like that's more up in the air.
Oh, sorry.
Screen transitions and stuff.
Sorry, I might be having an issue with my internet. Could you repeat the last thing you said?
Also like a sort of a style guide for what screen transitions you use as well.
Yeah, I'll be putting that together and sending that to you. As far as like the sizing goes and the scale goes, these webinars, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the resolution at which the webinar is recorded depends on the host's camera. So if somebody with an older computer with a lower resolution camera records the webinar, it's going to require resizing. Whereas if somebody with a newer computer recorded the webinar, it probably won't require resizing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And so it's going to be a judgment call that you have to make once you've imported it. You're like, oh my God, this is not the right size. I need to fix this. But in my experience the past 2 months, they've pretty much been good to go right when you import them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. I'm actually going to be doing some interviews on Zoom myself, so it's like this worked out perfectly for editing it. When the Zoom recording is saved, which parts, like what part is actually being recorded? Is it only like this whoever's speaking in the corner and the slides, or is it based on who's recording it and what they have on their screen?
That is a really good question. I don't know all the details of that. Based on my experience with these, I think it depends on if the recording is a webinar or if it's just a meeting. So right now, this is just a meeting. So it's recording whatever's on my screen, and I have it set up to grid view right now so that I can see y'all. If the host was doing a webinar, it would only be the host's screen.
Okay, so if I wanted just to record the person individually, I would just set it up as a meeting then, and then just lock their screen.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that's the way to do it, but you might want to run a test with that and double check that it'll work. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Cool.
One question. So when there are projects that need editing, how will the assignment process work?
That is a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. So there's on our Facebook page, there's a calendar with upcoming events, and it says like the dates for upcoming webinars and things like that. So I will be checking that and periodically sending y'all updates on when a webinar might be coming up that needs editing. So yeah, that'll fall on me to give y'all a heads up on when these things need to be edited. My goal would be to give you at a minimum 2 days notice. Ideally, I'd be letting you know at least a week in advance, but sometimes things come up kind of spur of the moment. So sorry, just a moment. My roommates are being kind of loud. 1 second, y'all. Sorry about that. Yeah, so it'll be my responsibility to keep y'all updated on the calendar and upcoming trainings, at least a week's notice. I mean, but sometimes it might be 20 or 48 hours notice. And with these webinars, 9 times out of 10, it's not super urgent. If it takes you 2 days to get to it, not the end of the world. But we do like to have them all on our YouTube page because just given the state of the world, everything's online now. We can't have these meetings in person, and it's really nice to be able to preserve them on our YouTube page for people that can't make the meetings or the trainings, because we do get a lot of folks watching them later. So it's super useful, and it's gonna be really nice to have folks to help out with it because I've been doing all of them to this point. So I guess one thing I want to show you, actually, does anybody else have any other questions? Nothing at the moment. Cool. I'm going to share my screen again and just show you one more time what these more advanced projects might look like. So let's go to Open Project, go back to, all right, so the Artful Activism team, which is the main team I work with, we're doing a series of how-to videos, and once y'all have gotten the hang of using Adobe Premiere, I might have you help out with some of these. So here's one that was completed. So this is what a completed video will usually look like. So you have, actually here, I'll just play it through and we can watch it. Missing an asset there that's supposed to be the 350 Seattle.
Hey y'all, I'm B. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with 350 Seattle's Artful Activism crew. And today I'm going to teach you how to make stencils because we believe art is super important for social movements. So we wanted to share some of our tools. In a time of COVID, it can be really difficult.
Cool. So you get the idea. It's B, one of our Artful Activism leads, teaching y'all how to make stencils. And just the reason I wanted to illustrate or show y'all this is so that you can have an idea of how the layers work in video editing. So my base audio layer is the music track. And then I have the audio for B's interview underneath that. And then I have some additional audio effects added in there for transitions. Now, then the video layer 1 is the actual interview. And then I have B-roll footage on top of that in the other video layers, which you can see here. For the titles, you can see I added, created 3 separate titles and then added effects to them and layered them according to the order in which I want them to appear. And when I go to export it, this is perfect because this is the last thing y'all need to know is how to export a video. You set your in and out points. So if you remember when we were selecting footage in the source panel, we used the I and O keys to set in and out points. When you're exporting your video, you do the same thing in the timeline. So you go to the beginning, you hit, here, I'll just show you. So you go to the beginning and you hit I to set your in point. And then you go to the end and you hit O to set your out point. And then everything that is in between those is what will be exported. And to export, you come up here to File, Export, Media. Just ignore that for now. All right. And this is what the panel looks like when you're exporting your video. So the first thing you'll do is name it. And when you click on that, you also choose where to save it. So make sure you're saving it in the correct place and that has the appropriate name. Now, all this other stuff down here, it can get kind of confusing, but all you really need to do is, what I prefer to do is hit match source. So you can see it says automatically sets video settings to match the source video's properties. And that's matching your sequence. So when you do that, it will, you can see right here, source, this is your sequence, the correct resolution, 1920 by 1080, the correct frame rate. I shot all of that at 24 frames per second. And then you can check your output, which is your export settings, and make sure that these match. So you want to make sure your resolution matches and your frame rate should match as well. And then you come down here. For the longer webinar videos, I don't recommend hitting render at maximum depth. It doesn't make it that much of a higher quality. So for the webinars, you might uncheck that one. You can ignore all those settings. And then this one right here is the only other setting that you'll really have to control for exporting. So this target bitrate, basically what that means is how much information does the video use per second? How many megabytes per of information per second is required to play back the video? So right here, I have it set at 15, which is a pretty good middle ground between giving you a high enough quality video and a small enough file size. So now look, as I change this, the target bit rate's right here, estimated file size is right here. So as I go down, the estimated file size goes down, but so does the resolution. And as I go up, the estimated file size goes up. So that's 2 gigs. That's really big for a 6-minute video. So what we're going to do is keep that right at 15. And then when you're done, you just hit export. And I'm not going to export that right now because that would take up too much power on my computer. And then the way that we're going to get these on YouTube is there'll be a Google Drive that we all have access to, and you just upload your edited video to the Google Drive, and from there, someone from that has access to the YouTube account, either me or one of the other arts team leads, will upload it to YouTube and add all the correct info and description and all that stuff. Cool. That's more or less what I wanted to cover. I think this is something that I could talk about for hours, and I've been rambling for the past hour, so I'm having a hard time cutting myself off. But yeah, are there other questions y'all have for me right now?
One more. So when you were showing all the layers, you had there like V1 through V8 on the video layers. So 8 is the one that's in the background, right? That's going to be anything that's on top, anything that's lower, like like 1 through 7, that's going to go on top of 8, right?
That is a very good question. I'm super glad you asked that. So yeah, the way the video layers work is that whatever's on top is what you'll see. So if you have 2 video clips that both take up the entire frame, the one on top will only be the visible one. So I had the interviews on layer 1, and sometimes I want footage on top of the interview, right? So I put the other footage on layer 2. Does that make sense?
Okay, I thought, for some reason, I thought you said the opposite. I thought you said all the interviews were on layer 8, so that's why I was...
Oh, no, sorry,
okay.
sorry.
So
yeah,
everything on layer 1 is going to be, it's okay, got it. So layer 1 will be your basic. That makes sense.
Yeah, I totally could have said that wrong. My apologies if I didn't explain that correctly. And then the audio doesn't work the exact same way. The audio, regardless of what layer it's on, you hear them all equally. So you have to, for example, a music track, regardless of what layer it's on, you have to double click the music track and go into the effect control panel, and then you can control the volume of the music layer so that it's a little quieter and it's easier to hear the person speaking. And I didn't expect y'all to like be professional video editors at the end of this. It takes a long time to get used to these editing softwares, and you know, I've been doing this for so many years that some of it seems intuitive to me, and it really just isn't intuitive and can be very confusing and frustrating. So you can always reach out to me with questions. But honestly, even though I got a degree in filmmaking, I learned everything about using these editing programs on YouTube. So if you ever have a question about how to do something in Adobe Premiere, you can literally type your question into YouTube, and I guarantee you there's somebody that made a video about it. So that's kind of a good go-to source for troubleshooting stuff if I'm not available. Any other questions?
Once we get access to it, can we have some time to spend, like we can sign up for like practice time?
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah. Since there's only a small group of us that'll be using that account, I expect you to be able to use it more or less whenever you want to practice, work on other stuff, you know.